Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a pretty specific Christian perspective that talks about a hidden spiritual conflict that's shaping our culture. We're going to use their own words and their own arguments to really understand this worldview. So, where does this all start? Well, it kicks off with this really stark biblical warning quoted by Pastor Alan Jackson. And right away, it frames the whole issue not as some far-off problem, but as a direct, deceptive threat that's coming from inside the church itself.
And this is the crucial point they're making. These savage wolves aren't just banging on the gates from the outside. The argument is that they're already inside, maybe even leading the flock.
And you know what the real focus is here? It's all about the language. The source argues that familiar Christian words and phrases are basically being hijacked to push a totally different agenda. It means that just seeing a label like church or Christian isn't enough anymore. You've got to be way more discerning. Okay, so if there's this big threat, what exactly is it? How do they break it down? Well, the sources lay out two key ideas that are totally connected. One is an internal problem they call false gospels, and the other is an external force they call spiritual warfare. So you can really see it laid out here. It's like a battle on two fronts. On one side, you've got these ideas that are twisting the faith from the inside out. And on the other, you have this bigger cultural push from what they describe as outside, even demonic forces. The idea is that both are working toward the same goal, to weaken traditional Christian beliefs. All right, let's zoom in on that first idea, spiritual warfare. A guest on Tucker Carlson's show describes this not as some kind of metaphor, but as a literal fight with a personal force of evil. A force that is, and this is key, really intelligent and strategic in how it operates in the world. And get this, the argument is that these forces don't just act randomly. No, they're smart. They target their efforts where they can get the most bang for their buck. This quote says it all. Why try to influence millions of regular people when you can just influence a few key players in Hollywood and let them do the work for you? Okay, so if the plan is to go after culture, where are the battle lines being drawn? Where is this all supposedly happening? And wow, when you look at the list of battlegrounds they point to, it's pretty much everywhere. We're talking about everything from the NFL and the Grammys to corporate DEI policies, immigration, and even the future of AI. They see all of these as places where this spiritual fight for influence is going down. And the argument they're making is super specific. They're not just talking in hypotheticals. They point to things like the Grammy Awards or the Super Bowl halftime shows as prime examples. The source literally describes these events as, quote, practicing witchcraft on the stage right in front of you, arguing that it takes satanic imagery from the fringes and puts it right into the mainstream. Okay, so that's the external battle, but remember, there's a whole other front to this war. Let's pivot back inside the church and look at these so-called false gospels that Pastor Alan Jackson says are causing problems from within. First up, they talk about something called the social gospel. From this perspective, the problem isn't that it's not compassionate. The issue is that by downplaying the idea of sin, it fails to prepare people for what he sees as the reality of a final judgment. And in his view, that makes it false good news. Then you have what they call the gospel of comfort. You've probably heard this idea, that faith is basically a tool to get a better car or an easier life. But Jackson pushes back on that, hard. He points to devoutly religious people suffering in places like Ukraine and says, see, you can't measure your relationship with God by your bank account. And the third false gospel he points to is what he calls the Marxist gospel. Now, he claims this ideology's big flaw is that it denies the Christian idea that humans are inherently flawed. So in his view, it tries to swap out the need for a deep personal transformation through faith for a political fix, which is the pursuit of equity. All right, so that's the problem, right? An attack from the outside and corruption from the inside. So what's the solution? What are you supposed to do about it all? Well, the sources are actually very specific about a call to action. The answer they give is definitely not about sitting back and waiting. It's a really active three-part plan. First, they say you need to be a smarter consumer of religious ideas. Don't just trust the label. Second, speak up about what you believe is wrong, even if it leads to awkward conversations. And third, move from a defensive faith to one that actually gets out there and tries to shape the culture. And that's really the whole point, isn't it? It's this major shift away from a faith that's just personal and private. This quote from Alan Jackson just nails it. The goal in this worldview isn't just to meet up and sing songs. It's to go out and make an impact on society. So to make that shift, you need a whole new way of thinking. They say you have to ditch this idea of a compliant religion and instead embrace this model of a courageous Jesus, someone who they say actively attacked God's enemies. And this change in perspective is framed as being absolutely essential for the nation's future. When you lay it all out like this, you really see how deeply these kinds of spiritual frameworks can shape how people view culture, politics, pretty much everything. And it leaves us with a bigger question to chew on. In a time when we're all so divided, what kind of power do these stories really have in our society?